Hello y'all, this is Shane Messer, and today we're going to be talking about timbre. So, when I say timbre, I'm referring to the unique sound of an instrument or a person's voice. Kind of like how our voices are different, right? My voice is different from your voice. They have certain innate qualities that make them different. And not just our singing voices, but also our speaking voices. So, we can apply this to instruments as well. They each have unique sounds and qualities, right? So, there's two main categorization systems for classifying instruments. One's based on how the sound's produced, which is not as common, but it's gaining a lot of traction. We'll touch on briefly. And the other one's based on more what the instruments are made of and just what they are, basically. So, I'm going to focus on that because it's more common. There's 4 or 5 main categories of instruments. You have woodwinds, brass winds, strings, percussion instruments, and then, of course, you also have the keyboard family, which is kind of special, and the electronics family. So, starting with the woodwind family, my favorite because I play clarinet, the instrument. You have flutes and reeds. Flutes are instruments that you vibrate air across them to produce sound. So you have like the recorder with a predecessor to our modern flute you may have played in kindergarten or grade school. Really beautiful instrument actually. The modern flute, which is actually made of metal, but flutes were once made of wood, so that's why they're considered woodwinds. And you blow air across them to produce sound. And you also have, of course, the more ancient predecessor to the recorder even, the pan flute, if I can find the patch. And of course it could carry as many pitches as you wanted. It just you had to make more of the little tubes that started kind of small and got gradually bigger as you went lower to produce different pitches. You've probably seen that before in cartoons. So that's the flute family, basically. You also have the higher pitched piccolo, which is above the flute. There's subcategories in all the families of instruments, which we'll kind of talk about later. They're named after the voices of the choir. Little piccolo there. Going to the reeds. You have reeded instruments like the saxophone, which is one of the youngest instruments, especially in the woodwind family, and the clarinet. I have my mouthpiece here. As you can see, reed instruments, they vibrate using, the way they produce sound, all instruments produce sound via vibration. Woodwinds produce sound using, reed instruments produce sound using a little piece of wood called a reed. It's usually a piece of cane wood or maybe bamboo. This is probably cane. As you can see, it's fastened to my mouthpiece and it vibrates when I play it to make sound. And double reed instruments like the oboe and bassoon, English horn, those are instruments that they actually use two pieces of cane wood together that form a double reed as a mouthpiece, and that's what they play on to produce sound, basically. So subcategories of woodwind family, you have flutes and reeds, subcategory of reeds, single reeds and double reeds. Moving on to brass winds. Those are instruments made of brass. You have, of course, the higher pitched trumpet. You have the more middle pitched French horn, which is one of my favorite instruments. I love the foggy sound of it. Really beautiful, nice range too. Then you have the lower voices like the trombone, which actually uses a slide to change pitch. Then you have the baritone euphonium and the tuba, right? So I actually have a bugle over here, and I'm going to use it to demonstrate how brass instruments produce sound. Give me just a moment, please. Basically, sound on brass instruments is produced by buzzing your lips. I used to not be able to do that. I used to think it was a hum too, so but it's actually vibrating your lips, kind of like a raspberry type thing. Just more focused, and I can demonstrate this on my bugle. Now I'm not a very good brass player, but I've been working on this a little bit. Shop's a little tired of this, but you get the idea. So that's how brass instruments produce sound. Moving on to percussion instruments that are hit, scraped, or scratched to produce sound. We have, of course, the drums. Instruments like that. Those are considered non-pitched percussion instruments because they don't have a they only have one pitch, or they don't have a recognizable musical pitch, like that. So those are non-pitched. Cymbal, there's a lot of auxiliary or toy percussion instruments like the cowbell, wind chimes, instruments like that were once used for other things. The snare drum was once used on the battlefield, actually. Then we also have pitch percussion instruments, so like mallet instruments, like the xylophone or vibraphone you may have played on as a kid, in the nursery, or we have, of course, larger ones in the band room that we use. That's a vibraphone. And you have the only pitched drum, the timpani, which you can change notes on, and it's pitched drum, also called the kettle drum. Kind of cool. The next family, of course, is strings, and they can be also divided into two categories. You have pluck strings and bowed strings. And really, if you want to add a third category, voices, because the human voice uses, obviously, vocal folds to produce sound. So those are considered that's considered a string instrument as well. Bowed strings, like the violin, and I guess I could have brought my violin out, but that's alright. And then, of course, the violin has its own little family too of string instruments: violin, viola, cello, double bass, going from highest to lowest. And those also they resemble the voices of the choir, which we'll talk about later. We also have, of course, the pluck string instruments. So, So that was a harp patch, of course. The harp is a pluck string instrument used in orchestra sometime. Most of the other pluck strings aren't used in orchestra. They're used in like folk music or pop music, country. So you have like the guitar, banjo, mandolin, instruments like that that'll pluck to produce sound. Now we also have the electronic family, which is more of a recent invention. I'm actually technically using an electronic instrument right now to make most of all these sounds. It's sounds made via electricity, thankfully. And we also have the keyboard family, which is a very special family because it's kind of in between two other families. Some people would argue that the keyboard, take the piano for instance, is a percussion instrument because you have to strike it to produce sound. So, and others will argue that it's a string instrument because it has strings inside that vibrate to produce the sound. So it kind of has its own unique family, the keyboard family. And this becomes a little problematic when you get into instruments like the pipe organ, because that instrument, it's similar to a woodwind in some ways because you have the pipes, bellows that produce sounds, using air rushing across them. It's kind of like a flute in some ways. So it becomes a little bit problematic. So that's why there's actually another classification system we're going to talk about. And let me see the list here, just so I don't mispronounce these or mess up on the. The other more modern categorization system that's being used is based on how the instruments produce sounds. So you have idiophones, membranophones, chordophones, aerophones, and electronophones. You can probably guess what they are based on the sounds, based on the names. So electronophones, instruments that produce sound electronically. Aerophones, instruments, both woodwinds and brass winds, produce sound via rush of air. Chordophones, instruments that have chords or strings. Membranophones, instruments that are produced using by striking or rubbing a membrane of some sort that resonates to produce sound. And then idiophones, let me look that up real fast because I remember, but hang on. Oh, it's struck, shaken, or scraped, so like a bell, a gong, or a rattle. Okay. So that's the more modern categorization system. I won't focus on it as much. The other one's far more common, but this one is gaining a lot of traction just because of the problems we talked about with the organ. So, let's set this back up here. That's basically it for timbre today. Tomorrow we might talk a little bit about the voices of the choir and how that's influenced instrument families and naming of instruments and ranges. So I really hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe. Love you guys. Peace out.